Good morning. I'm on the West Coast today. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I want to start off by thanking Medgar Evers College, the City of New York, the Center of Business and Economic Research, the International Journal of Business and Economic Development, and I want to send a special thanks to the conference chairs, Dr. Joanne Roll, the Dean of the School of Business for Medgar Evers College, and Dr. Dot Pata with the Center for Business and Economic Research. So I won't go into my bio. I think there was a wonderful introduction, but my firm, BNC International, as mentioned, is the oldest Black-owned global strategy consulting firm in the US. Our CEO and founder, still to this day, Dr. Robert Brown, established the Minority Business Enterprise Program under the US Department of Commerce during the presidential administration of President Richard Nixon. And even to this day, we have a very strong relationship with MBDA as it has evolved into. And through that, we have established a very extensive Pan-African objective that expands beyond major corporations, where we've been a liaison for almost 60 years now between between the continent of Africa and the United States. But we take an even deeper approach to inclusivity and include within that the promotion and the identification of opportunities and the securement of opportunities for US small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as African small and medium enterprises. This is just a sampling of our clients from over the past 60 years. Many of whom this represents both our domestic client work and our international work. Our process and the way we execute in many cases, because we are a boutique firm and have had offices across the continent and in various states across the United States, we've remained small, if you will, and kept our boutique feel so that we could have authentic representation and relationships with our clients. And we do that by creating very strong business relationships with industry associations, private sectors, and government agencies. We are a firm that specializes in developing ecosystems, and all of our projects today are developed, run, operated, and managed by on-the-ground experts and subject matter experts here in the US and throughout the continent of Africa. And we do that, and we focused on the continent of Africa because of the expectation that SMEs are going to create almost 90% of the jobs on the continent between now and the year 2030. And that's very key to the discussion today. And I'll go a little bit deeper into that throughout this presentation, but I wanted to start with giving some context in terms of the topic, where we're taking it, and more importantly, how we are collectively developing the strategies for a post-COVID-19 economic recovery. And there's a lot of discussion about that now. In addition, with the new Biden administration, discussion around what will the new United States Africa agenda be. And I will cover a lot of different points and different perspectives based on analysis of data pulled from the census reporting and from my kind of everyday interactions. But today's topic is really going to focus on the viability of economically connecting Africa and its US diaspora to create global economies. So when you think about post-recession upswings, and it is as bad as 2020 was with with COVID-19 and with kind of political unrest globally, if you think about past recessions, and the most recent one that ended in 2008, excuse me, that many of the major corporations that are really shaping how we live our lives today were created post 2008's recession. If you think about companies like Groupon that started in 2008, that is now valued at more than 726 million. You think about Venmo, that sold for 26 million in 2012, but then again has recently sold for the company that acquired it in 2012 just resold it for about 300 million. If you think about Slack, that started in 2009, that was valued at that's now valued at almost $16 billion. And if you think back to previous recessions and times of panic, even the companies that preceded these, when you think of General Electric and General Motors and Disney and HP and Google, were all either began or went through major pivots in their strategies to be able to grow dramatically despite times of downturn. So today, there are a lot of varying different definitions that people like to use regarding what diaspora is, but I'll stick to the African Union definition today as people of Native African origin living outside of the United States, irrespective of their citizenship and nationality. There are a lot of questions that I could start with and go over as it relates to Africa and its engagement, economic engagement and social engagement with its US diaspora. And clearly Africa has a very large global diaspora that includes, the Caribbean and Europe and Brazil, etc., South America. But I'll focus today on the Africa's US diaspora. So in terms of questions, some of the things that I'll be going through today, I'll be working at addressing and answering these questions here, where the home country or continent's economic growth and stability is impacted by diasporic engagement. What is the actual connection between a growing middle class and wealth creation? Is the US and continental Africa's economic development impacted by diasporic trade activity? And what are the key points of commonality in closing the racial wealth gap in the US and Africa? And then finally, what exactly is Black America's role in the redevelopment of the US Africa agenda? And you'll hear, and over the next probably 12 months, you will hear a lot of discussion around what will our collective Africa agenda be, particularly with the progression of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, with the expectation of the redevelopment of AGOA and varying other different free trade agreements between the US and varying different countries on the continent of Africa. One that comes to mind is the US and Kenya free continental free trade agreement that has been in discussion for some years now. So the value of US-based diasporic work extends, far beyond just Africa and its diaspora. When there are varying different countries, whether China, whether it's Europe, whether it's South America, whether it's Central America, and even areas like Nicaragua, the Democratic Republic and El Salvador, where their US diaspora has made considerable contribution to the economic stability of their respective home countries. So I'll begin here with diaspora remittances, and we all understand, particularly with the continent of Africa and its diaspora here in the US, that there has been a major drop-off in 2020 with remittances going from the US to the continent of Africa. And it is clear from kind of early research and understanding that a large part of that is as there's economic challenges here in the US, there's an obvious challenge of being able to send funds back home and invest back home in their respective home countries on the continent. But if you think about places like Mexico, which sends, historically a lot of money back to Mexican Americans, excuse me, that send a lot of money back to Mexico. You think of Chinese Americans that send a considerable amount of money back to China. Yeah, there's proof, more than enough proof, that shows how US diasporas have a strong connection and interconnection with the economic development of its home country and or continent. I think African Americans have a bit of an advantage in terms of you're not just having, well, some people see it as a hindrance. I see it as an opportunity because many African Americans don't have a direct familial connection to their family on the continent. It really opens them up. I don't see it as a detractor. I see it as an opportunity to open them up to having stronger relationships with diaspora community members in the US that can be able to help them reach and connect to varying different communities across the continent. And when you think about remittances in particular, Africa has some of the most expensive cost per transaction for remittances in the world. And with 8.9% is the value of the transactions from sub-Saharan Africa, and sustainable development goals are targeting 3%. So there's a major opportunity to be able to have fintechs and varying different strategies and solutions that are brought into the marketplace to be able to lower the cost of remittances and to be able to increase investment back to the continent, which at this point is one of the largest sources of foreign direct investment from the US to the continent of Africa. So in terms of Mexico, I'll pull out Mexico and its US diaspora as a non-economic relationship and look towards the messaging and its processes of public diplomacy, where it really works to build relationships and engage stakeholders located abroad that can advance specific interests and values. And the Mexican government has done a very good job of, despite I'll say controversial or complicated relationships between Mexicans and its US diaspora, the Mexican government has still done a wonderful job through use of its embassy, through use of social media, of really being able to frame the messaging of its US diaspora as skilled workers, as business partners who are engaged and interested in investing in Mexico, and really focusing on a very high appreciation for sending remittances back to Mexico. And the government has done a wonderful job of doing things like providing discounted loans, doing backing varying different loans to really catalyze Mexican Americans to continue to engage their brothers and sisters in Mexico. The next example I like to pull out and talk about and expound on are it's China and its connection to its US diaspora. And obviously China has a very well-known and well-traveled and extensive diaspora across the world. When you think about its US diaspora, there's a very strong connection there to how China and in terms of generational growth has grown to tremendous heights and really developed its manufacturing sector, its global manufacturing sector, and in large part due to some of its contributions from its US diaspora. In 2020, 217 Chinese companies were listed on the three largest listings between NASDAQ, the New York Stock Exchange, and the New York Stock Exchange America. And in 2021, that number actually increased from 217 to 248 companies on the NASDAQ from China. And most of these companies are either funded or run by Chinese returnees. And what you'll find that China does a very good job of is taking its multinational corporations like Google and Microsoft and UBS and Ernst & Young and BP and others, and hiring them in top management positions as in-country directors, and really giving a motivation for Chinese Americans or Chinese diasporans that were educated in the US, experienced in the US, to go back to China and have top positions to be able to help them institute their strategies and business practices that were learned and honed here in the US. So now I'll dive into, really the idea of and the value of Black-owned businesses here in the U.S. and what they're actually doing in terms of international business and export. So from this particular graph, as you'll see, and I'll give you a chance to kind of look at this. This is data that was pulled from the census, the most recent census. And I want you to really think about what you see here in terms of the types of Black businesses that are involved in exports, the money that they're generating, and I'll go into a little bit further expounding over the next few slides about how this has an impact on closing the racial wealth gap, addressing unemployment here in the U.S., and then those commonalities that you'll find over the with Black businesses on the continent of Africa. But from this, you'll see that more than 800 Black-owned firms in the U.S. are generating revenues of $1 million or more that are exporting companies. And you'll also see that 432 firms have less than 10 employees, and 371 of them are firms between 10 and 99 employees that are companies that export. And I bring that out because in a lot of scenarios where I work with corporations and I work with SMEs, there's an idea and a sentiment that in order for Black businesses to be able to engage on the continent of Africa and engage globally, that they have to be of a certain size and they have to have a certain amount of capital. And I'm here to say that that's not exactly true, particularly if they're leveraging the expertise and developing strong relationships with their diaspora. So in comparison to the diaspora exports of Chinese Americans with China and Mexican Americans with Mexico, you'll see that there's a huge gap in terms of the number of firms that export, diaspora firms that export with their home countries, and Black Americans that are exporting to the continent of Africa. And it may seem lopsided because what I did in this particular data set was pull out exports to Nigeria. However, again, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, Black Americans actually have an advantage because they even though they don't have a direct familial connection, they do have the opportunity of having Pan-African business strategies and business models that play on their connection with all of their brothers and sisters across the continent. And you'll see here that even there are 650 Black American firms that are exporting to African countries, 37 to be exact, and 550 of them are exporting to 32 sub-Saharan African countries. One thing I'll also mention about this particular slide is when you think about US diasporan communities exporting with their home country, that yes, they are taking advantage of their familiar connection, their connection to legal representation, their connection to just get a good idea of the nuances back home in their home country, and taking advantage of that. And again, that's not something that's isolated from Black Americans who have the opportunity to do the same with the continent of Africa, particularly now with use of the internet, particularly now with the use of technology. And even as a response to COVID, more and more people are comfortable and used to doing business through Zoom. Look at the conference that we're having here today. We have probably about 25 countries participating, all electronically, and all through Zoom and web chat. And this is the way that business is run and going to run moving forward. And we have an even better opportunity of connecting Africa to its diaspora now more than ever before. Global operations. And this is from the 2012 survey of business owners, where it shows that there are over 10,000 Black American firms that have operation outside of the US. And if you think about it from a perspective of there's over 2.6 million Black-owned businesses here in the US, there's a phenomenal opportunity for them, the sole proprietors and the small and those with employees, to be able to develop new growth strategies that are globalized and include the continent of Africa. And one of the reasons that I brought this up is because in reality, in reality, for many Black businesses here in the US, they belong to markets that are oversaturated. They belong to markets that are very mature. And in reality, it's very difficult for them to make great strides of growth just because of their ability and inability to compete at scale with their non-Black counterparts. But if you think about Africa as a source and a new market and a new opportunity, that through the AFCTA and varying other policies, there's an opportunity for Black Americans to partner in joint venture with African companies to help them maximize the fullest potential of free trade agreements on the continent. Because tariffs and tariff reduction on its own isn't enough to be able to fully maximize free trade. There has to be ecosystems, and there has to be the ability to not only produce products, but to be able to manufacture them and move them freely and quickly. With this particular slide, I'm going into the direct connection between entrepreneurship and unemployment. And I raise a few questions here. One, is African American unemployment tied to the start of new Black businesses? The second is, during times of high unemployment, do Black small businesses have access to personal and family money? And this was a subject of high regard during COVID-19, where we saw 60% of Black businesses in the US close, and then the expectation that probably about 40% of them won't even open again, because many of them were started with personal money and family money. And as those families also go into financial strain, Black businesses typically don't have the capital resources to tap into those sources again. And then that also has an impact on international remittances. As I mentioned before, during the pandemic, we saw remittances going to Africa reduce. And a large part of that is people here in the US just aren't making as much money. So when you think about that, the question ends up being, can positioning Black businesses for international growth strategies create new revenue opportunities, strengthen them for post-COVID economic recovery, and then ultimately close that racial wealth gap that exists in the US, but also exists on the continent of Africa? And if you're thinking about Black...
2 more minutes.
Okay. So as we scroll through, there's the idea that by 2050, a quarter of the world's population is going to live on the continent of Africa. And if you think about data now, many of the Africans that are on our continent are not only migrating to the US, you can see it in data that shows and speaks to how much African languages are becoming languages that are highly utilized throughout the continent. So I'll skip through to the idea here that minority firms overemploy, and if they have access to having more capital and growing to a larger size, there's proof that there's a connection between Black entrepreneurship, lowering the unemployment rate of Black Americans, and then being able to close the racial wealth gap. I'll follow and go to my conclusions, where there's a clear reconnection opportunity of Africa to its US diaspora economically. That's of economic importance, not just symbolic importance. There's commercial policy that if progressive and innovative around the US Africa agenda, it will include Black small and medium-sized enterprises. There will be the intentional collection and publication of racially aggregated public and private sector data. And then we'll be able to create and adopt an interest in inclusive transatlantic ecosystems, where the messaging will be reframed as an imperative for business growth for Black businesses in the US and Black businesses on the continent of Africa. So I thank you all for allowing me to end today's session. I hope you all are taking some of the points that I've made today, and as you go and look at it as an academic or as a policymaker, that we are interconnecting the value of Black Americans in the US and its diaspora, and its brother and sister on Africa, to really expound upon US and Africa trade relations, economic development, to have deeper ties between the continent of Africa and the United States of America. So again, I thank you all, and I look forward, and I can be reached to have continued discussion around the data points that I provided here, and there are many more where I can go deeper into the topic that was raised today.
Excellent, excellent presentation. I don't know where to start. The key thing, and I'm hoping, Larry, that we will continue this discussion knowing, the content and the possibilities. This is something that needs to be continued. I'll tell you why. I went to Nigeria, and we had an event, a cultural event, and we wanted to give gifts to the participants, and we went to the market, and the entire market was dominated by made in China. There was nothing that was produced locally, nothing. And that was very painful, because as a daughter of a very, 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 very wealthy entrepreneur who was exporting timber in the 1960s to England, trading with Finch and Company, I felt that something was missing, that identity. So my plea to you is, in this great work that you're doing, try and see how you can convince, the descendants of Africa to focus on going home, investing in their roots, because their investment will not be exploitative in any way. Rather, it will be improving and uplifting. So that's the part that I want to leave on your plate, as if your plate was not full enough. And I open up, please, any questions, any while he's trying to respond.
I know we cut your time short, But would you tell the audience a little bit about your innovative work that you're doing in both South Africa and Rwanda, I think, or maybe it's Kenya? If you could talk just a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So after 2019 and the year marked the year of return, I mentioned our relationship with MBDA, but I began a project at that time to develop business resource centers across the continent of Africa that were focused on fostering collaboration between US Black businesses and African Black businesses to promote growth between the two, among the two of them. And I created a partnership between my firm, BNC, the National Business League, which is the largest, the oldest Black-owned, Black industry association focused on Black businesses that represents the 2.6 million businesses across the country, and MBDA to open these business resource centers across the continent. We're working towards opening the first two in South Africa. We are going into MOUs in Kenya, in Ghana, in Rwanda as strategic locations. We are also partnering in the Democratic Republic of Congo as well, where we're looking to open these growth hubs to grow Black businesses in the US and on the continent by bringing US corporations to the continent and working with US corporations on the continent to diversify their global value chains with Black businesses. And on the continent, we recognize that many of the Black businesses don't have the scale to operate in a global value chain. And therein lies the opportunity for partnerships, joint ventures, teaming arrangements, mentor protege programs for US Black businesses that are tier 2 to tier 4 to be able to work with these Black businesses and partner in a number of different capacities with Black businesses on the continent to give them the capacity and the scale to really leapfrog them to be able to be a part of global value chains of major corporations. And that's a project that's very, very important. We're doing Black business summits across the continent. We had our first with South Africa in partnership with the South African Embassy and the Department of Trade and Industry in two very Black focused industry associations in March. And we again are expanding these Black business summits across the continent. You find a lot of US Africa summits that happen. Typically, they aren't focused specifically on the integration and inclusion of Black businesses within those economic summits. So those are those are some of the projects that I'm very passionate about that we are engaging across the continent now, and even the inclusion of HBCUs into that conversation as well, because the generation and the workforce on the continent is really the youngest in the world at about 18 and a half to 19 years old. And if we are able to really show how these ecosystems can be, these transatlantic ecosystems can be developed, being able to position HBCU faculty, being able to position HBCU students to be able to work with this large and technologically advanced workforce on the continent of Africa, we'll be able to really create this time that we're in as a really a solution revolution, as one of my dear friends likes to call it, that we're in right now.